Welcome to the Trad Nurse Podcast. This is Christine. I'm your host. This is episode 13. Today's topic is medical gaslighting in nursing and how Florida just ended the childhood vaccine mandates and why nurses were silenced for questioning these childhood vaccines, especially if you've had your own children and gone through the coercion of the wellness visits with your pediatrician. We're going to talk specifically about something historic that happened in Florida and how it exposes the biggest form of medical gaslighting nurses have lived through for decades, actually. Forced childhood vaccination. Let's jump in. As of this week, Florida Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Ladapo and the Department of Health now have the authority to permanently remove 4 childhood vaccine requirements from the administrative code. So that means varicella, which is the chickenpox, hepatitis B, influenza, and the pneumococcal. These are no longer required for school or daycare children in Florida, effective immediately. No religious exemption needed, no doctor's note, no begging, no crying. The remaining 3, the DTaP, the polio, and the MMR, are still written into state statute. So lawmakers have to finish that job by removing the written statute so that these 3 vaccines can also be removed. Florida became the first state in America to say the only answer a parent ever has to give about a vaccine is yes or no. The parents still have the choice. All of these vaccines are readily available. Your body, your child's body, your choice, period. No questions asked. And nurses, you and I both know what happened the last time we dared say that sentence out loud at work, your body, your choice. We were called dangerous. We were called fake nurse. We were called conspiracy theorist. We were coerced. Our jobs were threatened. We were written up. We were called into HR. We were told if you don't believe in the science, then nursing is not for you. That, my friends, is textbook medical gaslighting. Let me read you the clinical definition of gaslighting and then tell me if it sounds familiar. Manipulating someone into doubting their own observations, memories, or sanity. Every nurse listening right now has been on the receiving end of that exact tactic. When we brought up a baby who started seizing, stopped breathing 12 hours after the vaccinations, a perfectly healthy teenager who developed myocarditis 2 days after the vaccinations. The package insert, we actually read those side effects, Guillain-Barré, transverse myelitis, and sudden infant death syndrome as possible side effects. And there's more. Or the fact that our own federal vaccine injury court has quietly paid out nearly $5 billion since 1988 to families whose children were killed or maimed by vaccines. Nurses, we brought receipts. They brought shame. We brought data. They brought the phrase misinformation. We said, I'm worried about our children. They said, you're anti-vax and you're a threat to public health. That is gaslighting. And the craziest part, the same administrators who called us conspiracy theorists in 2020 and 2001 and on are suddenly silent now that Florida just proved our concerns were never fringe. They were prophetic. I can tell you from my own experience of being a new mother and questioning the pediatrician on my son's wellness visit, my perfect baby boy, I questioned her about the vaccines, and this was in 1999. I flat out refused the hepatitis B, the influenza, the pneumococcal, and the chickenpox vaccines. I asked to see the side effects. There wasn't one provided to me. I asked, why are we giving a perfectly healthy baby hepatitis B, which is transferred by sexual activity, via a sexually transmitted disease and drug use. And why are we giving my baby the influenza vaccine? I'm not sick. My baby's not sick. And as a RN, I was always the one that refused the flu and pneumonia shot. Plus, I remembered getting the chicken pox naturally as a kid. Why was that same natural immunity being robbed from my child? My child didn't get any of those vaccines. And in fact, both my kids were exposed to chicken pox and did go through the symptoms of chickenpox. It wasn't that bad. I was told, "Oh, you're horrible. You're giving your kid a disease by letting them get the disease naturally." I wasn't the only mother that did that. There was a group of us. We shared lollipops. But anyways, back to that time, my mind was swirling. And all I got from the doctor was, because this is the standard of care and this is the doctor's duty. This is our duty to protect the child from public health. And I said, since when is coercion the standard of care? I managed to calm down. I remember the nurse had to come in, and we did convince the doctors to space out the other 3 vaccines, the MMR, the polio, and the Tdap. But the doctor was pushy. But thankfully, I had a more pushy personality and won. However, my son did develop a very high fever and seizures shortly after his first wellness vaccination visit. And I remember thinking he was fine. And literally right after his vaccinations, he was having seizures that night, and we were up all night. My spidey senses were on alert. I did not feel right about the doctor flat out refusing that it was not related to the vaccines that he literally just had. And they make you think you're crazy. And then I just remember my husband, he was on board with me in the beginning. He was the reason why we spaced them out. He knew that there was a link to autism, but then she must have convinced him, because all of a sudden he wanted to give the kids the vaccines, and I fought him on that. But my son had the febrile seizures, they call them. I think it was because of the vaccines. The doctor did tell us to give him Tylenol, which I remember we did, plus the ice under the armpits and the cooler baths. And now that I know you're not supposed to give Tylenol to your babies after vaccines, because it just adds fuel to the fire, basically killing your child or giving them some kind of neurological symptoms or a form of autism. I don't know the science behind that, but I just know that was my lived experience, and it was awful. And making you feel like you're crazy when you know your kid more than anybody, you're the parent, and you're the one that's been given the authority to protect them. And here we just give that away to these doctors that they're making money by pushing this narrative. And that's bullying with a stethoscope. In Vermont, this was all in Vermont. I had my children in Vermont. The public health department trained the school administrators and medical staff to tell parents the religious exemption form had to be notarized and include a 500-word essay, and the parents had to take a quiz. It was frowned upon to get a religious exemption from the vaccines for public school. And certainly for some parents, that was a barrier. The parents could not be bothered with the pressure and would just cave and give their kids the vaccines instead of fight with the school administrators. However, that was never in the statute, and we were literally made to think that they could not go to school if they didn't have these vaccines, which again is just coercion. And when I pointed out the law only requires a simple statement of sincere belief, school staff said, "We are protecting the community." Vermont made it such a fight. Thankfully, you can move to a state that is pro-freedom, like Florida. I live in Florida now. So now in 2025, Florida just made all of that vaccine theater completely irrelevant. They gave the power back to the parents. No exemptions, no permission slips, no medical history, just a yes or no. That's how it should be. So to every administrator who gaslit us, threatened to fire us, to every state authority who threatened our nursing licenses, to every coworker who whispered, "Just keep your head down and give the shots, take the shot, just shut up and do it." Look at Florida. We were right. You were wrong. And history is correcting the record in real time. And I'm just so thankful I'm getting to live through this. So here's the truth nobody wanted nurses to say out loud. These diseases are not the Black Plague. This is 2025, not 1825. We have vitamin A protocols that drop measles mortality by 80%. We have vitamin C IVs that crush sepsis from chickenpox complication. We have outpatient monoclonal antibodies, antivirals, and supportive care that makes these childhood illnesses survivable at rates our grandparents could only dream of. And let's not forget, natural immunity is stronger than any vaccine. The risk benefit conversation was never allowed because the conclusion might have been no. They did not allow us to have these conversations with our doctors, our colleagues, our families. And that was never acceptable to nurses who built their careers on 100% compliance. Florida just lit the match. Let's make medical freedom burn in all 50 states. If you are a nurse who's been injured, if you've had a baby or held a baby who's been vaccine injured, if you've been written up for telling the truth, this episode is for you. You were never crazy. You were never anti-science. You were the last line of defense for bodily autonomy in a system that forgot what nursing actually means. You survived the matrix. No amount of threats, coercive attacks, harming of your reputation, or money thrown at you made you cave. In my opinion, that is what a real nurse is, a hero. Someone who protects her patients, her babies, her families, community with truth and safety. We took a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. You nurses that held your ground survived one of the largest psychological attacks on humanity. We are lucky to have you in our profession. Drop your stories in the comments. Tag a nurse who needs to hear this. Share this with one colleague who's still afraid to speak. Because the only way we lose now is if we stay silent. We don't ask permission to tell the truth. We're done apologizing for caring more about patients than policies or our doctors' pocketbooks. See you in the next episode, and keep fighting.